Okay, everybody. Tamara and I are here for another kind of hot topic session. This time we're talking about the ever scary diastasis. And I think Tamara is a guru in this department. I've even taken a course from her where she helped to explain it in a lot more detail. But what I've noticed is just like all the other topics out there, this one's getting a lot of mention and it comes with a lot of fear. And so clients come into us kind of like, oh my gosh, I have this diastasis, and I think we're just wanting to clear up some of that confusion and help you feel like it's not so scary and help you feel like you know what to do about it. So, Tamara, why don't you start by just kind of talking about why it even happens during pregnancy? And if someone said to you, how do I know if I have it during pregnancy? Kind of what would you say?
Okay, so I guess first of all, a really important thing to note is that it doesn't just happen during pregnancy. It doesn't just happen during the postpartum. Kids actually have it. They, start with it, and then you can carry on with it as well. And I've seen it in lots of athletes and just people in general. So it's not just that prenatal or postpartum period. So we want to try to normalize it in that sense that it is something that does exist.
Mm-hmm.
And basically it is normal during pregnancy as well, because the abdominal wall needs to stretch to be able to accommodate the baby's growth. So the diastasis itself is actually a gap between the two recti heads that sit sort of perpendicular. So it's a normal gap. It's the stretching of the fascia that kind of connects those two sides, and it is assisted, so tension can be generated in that fascia and through that gap through proper coactivation of the pelvic floor and deep core, so your transverse abdominals.
Yeah.
So essentially that's technically what it is, and it's a normal and expected part of function, of the abdomen.
Totally.
So that's why we should be more normalizing it in a sense, and then talking about, okay, well, why does it widen? It widens because of pregnancy or potentially some other reasons. And, but then again, not all women retain that gap in the postpartum period. So what that means is that some women will just automatically get that tension back through just normal everyday function, and then some women will continue to sustain that gap. Now, there's a statistic that does state that 60% of women postpartum do still have that gap at 6 weeks. Mm-hmm. So when you go for your 6-week checkup and you're told everything looks great because it's just a quick one over with your physician or midwife or whoever, I do still believe that checking for this is a really important thing to do, because it can impact pelvic floor function. It can impact your ability to get back and do things that you want to do.
Totally. And I think that it's important to know, how you said, basically you have to get it during pregnancy. And I think you do too, have clients that come in, you're like, oh my gosh, can you check if I have it? And I'm like, you do. I don't have to check, but I would say I usually tell women, I get them to sit back in the chair in my office. I'm like, sit yourself forward and notice that when you use your abs, a lot of women will get this coning or doming, they'll call it, or whatever. And that basically that is not a reason to lose a huge amount of sleep. All that's happening is the pressure you get from doing that movement is going to the part that's stretched on you the most. Right. And so, and then I think that it's scary when you see that after, but to understand that's still why it happens after. It just looks different because the baby's gone.
Yeah.
And I think I think that that's important, is your care provider may or may not check it. But if they do, understand that you probably very well fit within normal, even if you don't, I definitely lived outside normal. That doesn't mean that you're ruined for the rest of your life. There's things you can do about it. And I wonder, Tamara, do you feel can you just really quickly run through how someone would assess themselves? And I mean, it's hard to check during pregnancy because you've got this baby pushing out into your abdomen. But I kind of wanted to ask you about what women should be focusing on, once that baby comes. We've established it's pretty normal to have during pregnancy. Once you have the birth, and in those first, let's say, days and weeks postpartum, Where do you suggest women start? If it like to come, like, I'm not saying that they should start with like this crazy rehab, but like, what are some easy things that they can be mindful of in the first few weeks postpartum that would kind of address the tissues that are involved?
Right. So I think a couple things that are really important in the postpartum period just to look for on yourself is, okay, so, at about 5-6 weeks postpartum, you want to think, okay, well, how does the skin look around the abdominal region, first of all? Is it still quite loose? Is it, what's the integrity of it? Which means, like, how does it feel? Does it feel loose? Does it feel tight? Does it feel, because everyone differs in their fascia and their connective tissue and their skin. And so sometimes the skin can be an indicator of, a potential weakness in that system. So if you can just observe your abdominal wall and see how it looks, perfect. Then what you want to do is you want to kind of palpate along the midline of the abdominal wall. So, with your fingers technically between those two recti heads, feel at rest what it feels like all the way down from your solar plexus, your xiphoid process, all the way down to the belly button, and then all the way down to the top of the pubic bone, and just have a feel of what that feels like in the midline. And then you can do a gentle head and neck curl. So gentle curl off the pillow. So you're lying down at this point, and you can look for any doming at that midline or any belly bulging as well. And the reason we get you to do this automatic head and neck curl without, connect to your pelvic floor, connect to your core cueing, is because we want to see what happens when you automatically do this. And does the system coming on, right? Yeah. Is it automatically coming on after, pregnancy and delivery and whatnot? And that's important because sometimes something might be inhibiting your abdominal wall or your pelvic floor. And, that can create some issues with trying to improve this abdominal control and core control, which will hopefully help that diastasis. So when you're looking at this, you also want to feel it as well. Okay, how does it feel? Do I create some tension? Do I feel a bounce back of the tissue in that midline? Or do I feel that I can kind of keep going and my fingers keep going? And one area commonly where diastasis is present is actually above the belly button. So kind of, if your belly button is here, it would be more in this region. And then another area that you can sometimes feel like, oh, wow, I can keep sinking, is at the belly button, because sometimes women end up with a minor umbilical hernia. And that's also important to note as well. So just having a feel of the skin, a look of what happens with your automatic curl. Can you create some tension through there? That will be telling for you and telling with respect to what you may be able to accommodate in this early postpartum stage. I mean, you can check for this even earlier. It just depends on how you feel.
If you're ready for it. Yeah.
Right? If you're ready for it. I mean, we are lifting babies. We are getting up out of bed. We are rolling. We are carrying things around. So technically you could check it a couple days later, but sometimes, well, not sometimes, but the uterus and the whole internal system is still trying to, calm down.
Yeah.
And, yeah.
Get small.
Get smaller. So you're not necessarily going to get a good idea of what is happening until,
Totally.
you have that sort of initial healing period.
What do you suggest when it comes to like abdominal supports, like bands or compression? Do you suggest them? Like I would say that I tend not to. I do because I liked it for myself. I had a massive diastasis. I needed it, but I don't want to overwhelm people. So I don't know if I recommend them enough. I think they're valuable, but I don't like to be like, and you need to get this, and you need to get this, and this is 100, and this
Right.
is this. So I feel like I don't, unless I see someone that's like talking about it a lot, like it's on their mind, or that they have a really big belly. Or that I see, so those are the people that I'm like, listen, I would suggest that you consider this in the early days or weeks postpartum, but what do you do? Because I don't think that my answer is necessarily right.
Yeah, I would say that's the beauty of seeing people prenatally.
Yeah.
Is that we can get a feel for what the tissue looks like, because we also want to look at what you look like in standing with your belly, because some people jut out way out front, and you can tell that there's some tissue changes there that may be impacted in that postpartum period. So they may therefore benefit from like a support garment.
Yeah.
I always recommend it for my postpartum C-section moms.
Right.
I do recommend certain types as opposed to just your strict band that wraps around your belly, because I feel like sometimes, if not directed to put on correctly, it can actually create more pressure and irritation. So I feel like education on how to put them on is really important, and education on the appropriate type is also really important depending on the individual. Also, I feel that sometimes if moms have had a loss of integrity to the support mechanisms of their pelvic floor because of tearing or long periods of pushing or, you know, some type of intervention, they do benefit as well from some type of support garment, right? And then I do have some athletes who really just like the core shorts, and they don't need that whole like corset. But so it is still, I hate to say, like, it's not a recipe approach with the support, the garments either, but being seen in the prenatal period is super helpful to be able to determine if you may be suitable for that.
Totally. And I think it's important to note that those support garments, like sometimes there's so many options out there, and the marketing with some of them is all about like bring your diastasis in or like heal your diastasis with these bands. And I think that maybe if you speak to that in the fact that, like, what is that support actually doing?
So it's hard to actually really know, because there's not real evidence around it per se. So I guess this would be more speaking theoretically as opposed to evidence-based, which is important to understand, because that means that like no garment can technically promise a cure, and no program can technically promise a cure, because everybody's so different. However, some things that we do know is that in those initial stages of healing, think of it as an ankle sprain. You go and you sprain your ankle, grade 2, 3 ankle sprain. You're not just going to be told to walk on it right away and like not provide any support, feedback, you know, compression, right, to support that injury. Well, sometimes the same can apply to the postpartum with respect to birth and the abdominal wall. You know, sometimes that compression, that support, that sort of little hug that it gives you can help to facilitate and stimulate, whether it's the brain and the body, this nervous system, you know, your actual integrity. It can help to sort of guide that along. And it's not so much that it's doing one thing or the other. It may be doing that, but I think sometimes even you have to remember, if you feel better with it on, sometimes that can also be a huge stimulant to actually improving your integrity and control and ability to perform activity, because load is really important to generating strength in the pelvic floor and in the abdominal wall as well. So yeah, carrying your baby, lifting your baby. And if you feel sort of a tremendous weakness when you're doing that, ensuring that you're kind of trying to potentially like pre-contract before you do it, but also getting that extra support can be really beneficial, because it then allows you to continue doing it.
Totally. I could kind of just like, diastasis was definitely my biggest thing after having babies. And I would say that how it felt for me is that, like, just to step back, because I'm going to tie this in. Like, I created this Mommy Berries program kind of when I was going through my second recovery. And so I was like, these are the things that I walked through, like very gentle activation of like my transverse abdominis, my pelvic floor. And I found with like such a through the front that I couldn't feel it. Like, I knew what to do because I practiced and preached this all the time, but I couldn't really feel it. So I would find that I'd wear the belt, and it would basically just, I think, like give my muscles like a sense of support and a bit of approximation almost, so that they were like, oh, that's what you need, Melissa. I've been hanging way out here. And so I would find like I would do my like Mommy Berries exercises basically, and I would do 2 rounds with the belt on, and then I would take the belt off and try to replicate that feeling, so that I was getting progression, and then I would like wear it on and off, and I felt like it made a huge difference. And then to the point that I took it away, but I couldn't activate those muscles in the early weeks without it on. So I think that that's where it plays a role. And that's kind of what I wanted to ask you next is like, what do you think, like, let's say the first few weeks, what kinds of exercises should women be focusing on when it comes to diastasis recovery? Like, how do they help to create tension across that midline again?
So I think it ties into everything that you would have, but you do have in that Mommy Berries program for that initial period. Because what the biggest understanding needs to be is that it's not just about the abdominal wall. So, it's about, positions. What positions do you have to be in? It's about breath. It's about pelvic floor compliance. It's about, and so then it's about applying those sort of connect cues strategies to your movement. And we're bent over baby, we're breastfeeding a lot, we're, who knows, we may be sore from delivery, we may have scar tissue, we may have other things going on, or a previous injury in our history that, oh, now my hamstring or my groin is really tight, something like that. So I would say that, some of the things that would be important to focus on are your breathing, your, gentle pelvic floor contraction with the abdominal wall contraction, also working on mobility of your thoracic spine. So whether that's through, some flow of a exercise or stretch. So, opening up or just lying on your back, getting open, releasing with balls, anything like that would be really helpful, because this needs to be mobile and not rigid to improve that coactivation and that strategy to help improve the abdominal wall when you're doing exercises. And then, we tend to be, as we move along in our pregnancy and get quite heavy out front, we tend to become a bit like grippers in our bums. So, overusing that posterior tilt strategy and that sort of gripping of that posterior pelvic floor and bums. So it would be good to kind of work on opening through there, pelvic floor relaxation just as much as contraction, and then also releasing through the glutes. Technically, right, in and around the hips, I guess you could say, to help improve compliance, because that whole area is going to be, susceptible to different things, and therefore they all are going to apply as to how you're going to control your abdominal wall.
Yeah. And that's the thing, like, I don't know if you saw the video I posted the other day about, like, this is just the visual I have in my head. You always explain things in detail so much better than I do, but like we've got this huge amount of stretch that goes through like our whole abdomen when we're pregnant. And it just so happens that most of that stretch happens at the front, which is why you get a diastasis. Afterwards, the whole system is important, not just the front. And so that's why you're working in those first few weeks on like, inhale, everything lengthens, exhale, everything tightens. And you're just trying to get everything to work together, because the reality with diastasis is that all of those muscles that were affected during pregnancy work together. And that's why we start tying in like your breath with your pelvic floor, your transverse abdominis with your pelvic floor, because you're trying to get the whole system working together again. So that's kind of like, like what we would suggest for the early postpartum phase. But then I always say, like, go see someone after, because everybody's diastasis, or just because we're talking about diastasis in this situation, like everyone's diastasis is different, like as far as how far apart or how deep or whereabouts or like why you have it. Like, is it because, like, is it X, Y, or Z for you? And that's why an assessment is really important. Like the program, it just gives you the basics and gets you start to work on it. But then where should women go? Like after those boring exercises of like inhale, relax, exhale, tighten, and kind of feeling those muscles work, where generally, like when someone comes in to see you and then they have an assessment, what kinds of things do they need to progress to? Because I see a lot of women get stuck at the boring, I would say the boring, stupid exercises.
Oh yeah.
Stuck at the boring, stupid exercises. And then for the rest of their life, they're like, well, I can't do this and I can't do this and I can't do this. And because I have a diastasis. So anyways, that was a very long question, but like, where do people need to move from?
Yeah. And I think one of the big things is taking away that fear component of loading is a big thing. So, we shouldn't be afraid to load it. There's nothing in the evidence that actually sort of suggests that load is bad, right? And I think the research is going in the direction of like, oh yeah, we do need to move and load and work this area, right? And that is person dependent too, right? So it depends on your goal. So if your goal is CrossFit, well, then you're going to want to move towards progressive exercises that are going to mimic some of the things that you're going to have to do under more load than just your body when you move into that sort of side of what CrossFit offers. But then that would apply differently to running, right? So, you know, you're going to be wanting to do a lot of exercises that are body weight based and almost plyometric based in a way, power, agility based, that are going to apply to running or that goal of running. And then, you know, if you want to do Pilates and yoga, well, then that's also different, right? So, you know, Pilates is great as well. And if that's your goal is to get back to doing Pilates, then that's great. But you do still need to potentially move past even that to sometimes improve the diastasis as well, right? So not being afraid to add some, you know, curls to that, or, you know, do some different sort of exercise with some extra weight to, you know, facilitate strength, I guess, right? Totally. So it would be ideal to kind of understand what your goal would be moving forward, so that then with your physio, you can then move in that direction, because I wouldn't give the same exercises to the person who wants to run than I would to the person who wants to get back to the gym and lift and deadlift and whatever else, right? Totally. So I think that's where we want to make sure that there is still a notable understanding that, you know, it still depends a little bit on what your goal is.
Absolutely. And I think that I'm sure you would do the same. Like if someone comes into you and says like, I'll need to make an appointment about my diastasis, right? One of the first things I would say is like, why? Like, do you not like, is it something about what it looks like, or do you feel like it's like holding you back? Like, what do you notice? What bothers you about it? And sometimes, of course, a lot of them say their parents, I hate the look of my belly after I really do hate the look of my belly after I've had babies. But I also want to know, besides the appearance, I want to know, like, how is it inhibiting you? And so like, if they say, well, I can't do abs, I can't do my plank, I can't do these exercises, I say, why? And they say, well, I'm worried I'm going to damage my diastasis. And so we talk about like damage and what that actually looks like, which I totally want you to talk about. But I think that, like what I tell people is like, are you getting like back pain? Are you getting like symptoms in your pelvic floor, or are you getting like a feeling of instability through your belly, or do you feel like your belly's going like this? Because you have to remember that like all that balloon is connected. And I think that there's a lot of fear about getting that doming, or like, so maybe speak to that, because speak to why postpartum they still get that, and is that something that they need to like extremely worry about? So maybe speak to that. So I know that that's a very gray, I'm asking you to say something
it's a very controversial area as well, especially like right now, like currently, meaning, you know, the last couple of years or year even, right? But I would say that, you know, when I'm looking at a patient that comes in with diastasis, yes, you know, generally the concern is around appearance. And what that can mean is going all the way back to what I started with, was like the skin integrity. So what does that look like? Because sometimes that skin integrity, and I don't mean like adipose tissue, I don't mean like, you know, being overweight or anything like that. It just actually means the integrity of the skin. Is there loss of
crinkly? That's mine. It's like all crinkly. Yeah.
Right. So that can actually mean that, like, you know, there's a underlying potential genetic connective tissue thing, right? Or fascial thing. So that's going to be different, and that's not going to necessarily change, even though your diastasis may change and you may be able to generate tension, right? So I think that with the doming, sometimes when you lift your head off the bed, when assessing a patient, they'll just do that automatic head and neck curl and they'll get a bit of doming. And then I say, okay, well, now activate your core and your pelvic floor, or, activate your system or whatever that means to you. And they don't get it.
Exactly.
Right. And so, in cueing that initially, in those initial stages where you're trying to retrain. So retraining is different than actually strengthening, right? So you're trying to retrain that system. Sometimes we need to apply those cues to the retraining side of things. And then eventually it becomes automatic. You don't necessarily see that doming or bulging of the belly, right? And so is it a major issue? Well, if you're, I guess, maybe deadlifting a ton of weight and you're repetitively creating that doming, you might want to think, okay, well, maybe that might be an indication that there's a loss of...
it's like a weakness, right? It's like a weakness. Like your balloon is stretched and you don't have the power, right? And so, like you said, if you do it the way that you normally do, how does that feel? Do it the way with like a deep connection, and you'll notice you hold back that dome. And usually people are like, that's stronger. Exactly. So do it that way, right? Or
and then use that as a retraining principle towards then that automatic control that eventually will happen. Well, we hope happens, right? Because if you can generate tension, then technically you can do really well. And some women that when I first see them, their tension's not super great, they do really well too. I mean, I have the luxury of using an ultrasound machine to assess. So I can kind of see if they're generating tension across that linea alba when they're connecting and moving and whatnot. But so that's helpful. But I think one of the big things is assessing them also not only in lying, which some exercises begin with, but also moving to standing exercises quickly. So squatting, lunging, rotational stuff, walkouts, push-ups from your knees, those sorts of things are all going to be really important in developing that strength and control as well, and tension. And I think we always tend to maybe spend a little bit too much time with the exercise on your back, and then therefore and those are boring. And so therefore that can create that sense of okay, well, things aren't getting better. Cause when I stand up and do my whatever, then I still see that. Well, those are two different things. So, right.
That would be something you guys can all try as you're watching this, is pick a movement that you avoid or that you notice doming with, if you're worried about diastasis, and just do it. Just do it automatic and see what your system does. Then try to do the cues you use in the program, or think of connecting with your pelvic floor. You should feel tension across the front of your abdomen. And what those deep muscles do is they create tension on that, the tissue that we're talking about that runs between the six-pack muscles. So you should find that by holding back or tensioning that, when you go to do the exercise, the same amount of pressure isn't pushing out on it. And it's like you're holding back the pressure and dispersing it throughout the whole system instead of just at the front. Does that make sense? Because I think that at the end of the day, all doming is pressure trying to go out to the where you've stretched the most. But if you can make that tense, you shouldn't see the doming. And if you do, go see someone, right? Because that's what we're trying to say, is that it doesn't mean that you're broken. It just means that that part of you is stretched, and you still should be able to get back to higher level activity. And so, yes, I hope that we kind of covered the big picture and, progression and where people should be at a certain time. I mean, just to really say quickly, I still have a gap. I'll always have a gap. And I think that the biggest thing that, one of the biggest things that people believe is that in order to heal, you need to lose that gap. You don't. You can still create tension across that gap and feel strong. And that's definitely what I've had to work on. I still have the big belly. I still have all the stretch. I think my system works very well, but if I wanted a flat tummy, then I would have to have a tummy tuck. I won't get there, but I stretch too much. And I think that might be a topic that we need to talk about in the future, is I am this many years postpartum, and this is what it looks like. What, you know what I mean? What are people always want to know about what surgery looks like, and And I think that that's all important to talk about, because surgery is not for me, but surgery is for other people. And like everybody has you have different options, but I think it's important to be educated about them. So
because the appearance of what you have is not going to change. However, functionally you're good. So it would be more so to change the appearance as opposed to the actual function.
Yes.
Because the function allows you to continue to meet your goals, but the appearance is not ideal. And those are two very different things, and both are okay to go for surgery for, right? Like, so I think that is important to kind of address and ensure that, you know, I mean, I've seen numerous women who have gone for surgery because of the appearance. They've been functioning fine, but the appearance is just not what they're wanting to deal with. So, and that's fine. I mean,
that's your choice. You have that choice. Totally. But I think that kind of gives me an idea of some things we should talk about in the future. But I know you have to go get your kids. And I appreciate you doing this and your expertise. And I'll post this in the community right away. And all of you that are watching this, I say this every single time, but please do like add your comments or your questions. It gives us ideas of what you want to know more about, what we should talk about more. And please, like, we're here to help you. So ask away. Okay.
Exactly.
Everybody.
Bye.